hear me. Not very well. Maybe it is the power switch back here.
It is on, I think.
Thank you. Good morning.
That's much better.
Is that better? I'm nearer to it. Perhaps that's it.
Yeah.
Welcome to those in the parish hall and to those at home. Tuning in again for adult formation, Stephen ministry skills that you can use on your own wherever you are. I'm going to ask you again, last week we did a wonderful job of putting away chairs and tables after we were finished. I hope that we can do that again and save the family who lives on campus from having to do it themselves. So we begin today with Caroline Teague. Caroline will share some more Stephen ministry skills. Can you not hear me, Judy?
Oh, I can hear.
You can hear. Okay. Good. Caroline became a Stephen minister in one of our training classes here at Christ Church, and she became a full participant and meets regularly with our peer supervision groups, which are built so that they advise one another on how to build proper relationships, good relationships with care receivers. And so Caroline has been a part of that group. She is a 6th grade math teacher. She handed those handouts out like a math teacher, didn't she? She works in the Rockport school system and also teaches art to adults whom she calls curious beginners at the Slow River Studio in Topsfield. So Caroline told me that she finds that she uses Stephen ministry techniques in all her classroom work and every day. And we hope that you will take from her some of her skills that she's offering today in an episode we call Respecting Boundaries. Respecting boundaries in the age of social media. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, be present with us this morning. Make us sensitive to each other's desires and needs, physical and emotional, and help us to protect and defend each other's choices as we protect and defend our own decisions and plans. May we show respect for each other by keeping healthy boundaries in our own lives and by being especially careful when we communicate through social media. Lord, you have made us one. Teach us how to love one another. Amen. And now I give you Caroline.
Thank you. I've never been introduced before, so that was a very nice sense of occasion. Can everyone hear me? Because I can talk very loud, so if you can't hear me, just let me know. So I wanted to start with a little bit of a description of what my teaching career looked like in the age of COVID, because it sets the tone for difficulties with communication and technology. I have been teaching for 15 years. I did 10 years in private schools, one in a behavior school for students as violent offenders, and one at a school for students with language-based learning disabilities. And then I moved to Rockport, where I'm teaching math. So I had done 10 years with high school, 5 years with 6th grade. So 6th grade, what it looks like is they start here They end the year here, and they're talking all the time, all the time. Most of my job is going, shh. If I've got my hand raised, your mouth is closed. That's most of the time. They're sassy, they're funny, they're very chatty, and during COVID, my day looked like this. I would, get up my regular time, 5 o'clock, make coffee, sit down, journal, get ready for the day. I would go to my classroom at my kitchen table, would turn on Zoom, and one by one these sleepy faces would come on, and the computer screen would start to go like down here. So all you were seeing were people's foreheads. And eventually the screen would go up and all you saw were ceiling fans. I think for a year and a half, I just looked at ceiling fans, and that's all it was. There was no physical interaction, obviously, but there was no emotional interaction. I had students that would give me, if they gave me any answer at all, it was one syllable. How you doing today? What did you do on the weekend? Nothing. You excited about I saw you guys the other day. You were down at the beach. Did you have a good day at the beach? So that's 7:35. By the time the day ends at 2:30, it just feels frustrating, exhausting, and isolating. And it was nothing like what I had experienced as a classroom teacher in the actual classroom. And what really struck me during this time was that students had not changed. The students still wanted connection. They still wanted to learn. They still wanted to build friendships with me as their teacher, with each other, but they didn't feel safe to do so because it was this unknown, very visible space. You're in Zoom, you have no idea if what you're saying is being recorded by somebody's phone. You don't know who's on the other side. As we all know with Zoom, I'm sure we've all had this scenario where someone walks behind you and they weren't supposed to walk through a Zoom, or you see someone on another screen and you think, oh, I didn't think someone was supposed to be there. So it wasn't an environment that felt safe. And it was a very unknowable space. When we are with each other, we see each other. We're a known quantity. And so we're more likely to share. We're more likely to have a deep conversation. When we are in a space that is not known, those elements disappear. So I share that because the reality of the situation is that more and more people now communicate via text. They communicate via messaging through either Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. And I have a couple statistics on the handout that I gave you too. So Pew Research found that one third of Americans prefer texting to all other forms of communication. 1/3. Think about how many millions of people that is. That is a lot of people prefer texting. Adults aged 25 to 34 send and receive 2,240 texts a month. Adults 35 to 44, my category, send and receive 1,557 texts a month. Adults 45 to 54 send and receive about 998 texts a month. And adults 55 and over send and receive just under 500 texts a month. More and more, conversation is going digital. And with conversation going digital, as there are all of these inherent problems and challenges that we as Christians have to really dig deep in and to think about how to have meaningful conversations. So I think there are three major questions that this raises. The first one is, how does technology affect someone's level of comfort in sharing something difficult? How can technology make it more difficult to converse on a deep level? And I think the more existential question, what is a meaningful conversation? If you, like me, were raised in a time where it was very low tech, or in my case, no tech, where my mom would come out and would just shout at the porch for me to come in, and we were like dogs. We came in for meals, and that was it. And you were outside the whole time, and someone else's parents had the right to yell at you if you weren't doing what you were doing, and the mothers would call all of the different mothers to say, is my kid there? I'd send them back, send this kid back, you're here. I just got in my car when I learned to drive, and I just drove somewhere. I didn't have a phone. I didn't even have a water bottle. I guess I was just never dehydrated. You just went places. We just went places, we did things. So I have a very different view of what a meaningful conversation is. To me, a meaningful conversation is talking with someone one-to-one. My students, who are all born after 2005, they have a very different idea of what a meaningful conversation is. So here's another kind of frightening statistic. About 50%, so about half of adults 18 to 24, say that text conversations are just as meaningful as phone calls. So where this leaves us is we need to negotiate a space where we're having the same conversation. Because what someone can decide is a meaningful conversation in person, the other person who really prefers text communication or social media communication may feel very uncomfortable with that. And so this is where we have 4 issues that I want to talk about today and have us think about. First one is boundaries. How do we create good boundaries for both people? How do we remain focused? How do we maintain privacy? And the big one, how do we avoid miscommunication? So you have a handout. You're welcome to take notes. No one's going to get detention if you don't take notes, so don't worry about it. You'll be fine. And I invite you, if those of you who are here who are Stephen ministers, this will be information that we can use. For those of you that aren't, I would invite you to consider perhaps young people in your life for whom you're having a lot of online conversations with, or you're having a lot of digital conversations, and think about the ways in which these types of conversations are inevitably going to become a bigger part of our lives. So I want to talk about how can we make conversation successful. And the first thing is establishing boundaries. So when we think about boundaries, we want to think about I like to think about boundaries as respect. How can I respect myself? How can I respect the other person? Number one thing, if you are uncomfortable, say so. So if you are in a conversation with someone and they are texting you, say, I feel like what we're talking about would be better in person. How do you feel about that? So just put it out there, what you're thinking, and say why. When we just say, I don't want to talk about this on text. It seems like there's a lot. Give a reason, because if we don't give a reason, it's hard for someone else who really prefers the anonymity of texting to And I'm using texting as my main example because that's what most of us will, texting, emailing, messaging, it's all under the same umbrella. But state why. And think about it in terms of what, particularly for you, is the most uncomfortable piece. I'd love to have this conversation with you in person because I think I could listen better. That's giving a really specific reason, and it's making it about you. So another really good strategy is to use I statements. As we all know, at least for me, if someone tells me to do something, I'm much less likely to want to do it. If someone tells me how they feel about something, I'm much more likely to want to make that person feel comfortable. I would also invite us to approach this boundary conversation with empathy. Something that I have learned from my students, 12-year-olds are a great source of inspiration, and one of the reasons I love teaching 6th grade is that they have no filter. They will just tell you exactly what they think. I had a student, as a great example, I had a student who I was working with one-to-one, and the student looked at me and he goes, "Why do you have little holes in your face?" And I said, "Oh, well, they're called pores." He goes, "How come I don't have any?" I was like, "Well, you haven't hit puberty yet, but when you do, trust me, you'll get them too." And those are just the beautiful things about kids. And one of the things that I've learned from my students is when I ask them, "Why do you like texting?" they say, "It feels safe. It feels safe because I don't have to watch somebody else and try to predict what they think." So that's for people who are younger. I don't necessarily know that that's going to be the same reality for adults, but certainly for young people who are going to become adults, that's the world that they're growing up in. They also said, if I communicate through text, it gives me a chance to think about what I want to say. I don't have to respond right away. And when we dig a little deeper, not having to respond right away, to think about what you want to say, that primary emotion is really fear, that you're worried that someone is going to react poorly to what you're saying, and you want to take time to really think about what it is that you're going to put out there. So those are two things that I would invite us to think about. Another really important piece with boundaries, having clear boundaries with social media, is having a direct conversation about the frequency and availability that you are going to have with texting. Does anyone here use read receipts, R-E-A-D, on their phone? Anyone know what read receipts are? Okay, so if you and I don't know if this is true for Android, I have an iPhone. There's a setting on your phone that will tell you when someone has read your text. And it will say, read, and it will give a timestamp. There's no hiding. There's no hiding. Someone will have read it. You can turn that off on your iPhone. And a friend of mine is a pediatric nurse. She has her read receipts on because she will often get messages, read them, not have a chance to respond, but she wants people on the other end to know, I did read it, I did get it, but I didn't respond to it. I have mine turned off because I like my students, I want to think about what I want to say. I don't want someone saying, "Oh, look, she got that text at 9:35. It's 9:37 and she didn't respond yet." I don't want anyone. I need my time. But that's something that we need to have conversations about directly, because believe it or not, I have had full-blown discussions with people and the issue is at respect because of read receipts. They've said, "Oh, well, but you read it and you didn't respond to me. You looked at that at 10:01, but you didn't respond until 2 p.m. Were you mad?" I'm like, "No, I was at work. I didn't have a chance to respond. I was busy with this. I wanted to take time." And so when you are in, particularly as a Stephen minister, when you are in a caring relationship with someone and you happen to be communicating through text, if inevitably texting is the way that you end up communicating, have that direct conversation. What is your availability? There are going to be times when you're going to text me and I'm not going to be able to respond. It does not mean that I am not, it doesn't mean that I don't care about you. It doesn't mean that I'm not interested in what you're saying. This is, these are the windows that I will respond in. You can expect me to respond within a day. And it seems very formal and strange to have to make those boundaries clear. But there is so much ambiguity with texting and with written communication that the clearer you can make it, even if it feels a little strange and maybe a little awkward at the beginning, the more relaxed the conversation will be the further on you go. And the last piece about boundaries is the time of your texting and your response time. My phone is always on silent. I have all of these individualized ringtones for people. I don't know why my phone's never on. I never hear them. It's always on silent. So people can text me anytime. You could text me at 2 in the morning. It's not going to wake me up. I'm not going to see it until I get up. Other people have their phone on all the time, and that might also be a good conversation to have with someone. When is it appropriate to text? When would I feel comfortable with you texting me? When would you feel comfortable with me texting? We don't tend to think that way with phone calls because we know it. We grew up calling people on the phone and knowing you might not call after a certain time of the night, or you might not call before a certain time in the morning. But texting has a different set of values, and we just haven't been doing it long enough to keep in mind where some of those boundaries are. So, you've had your conversation, you're hoping to move this to an in-person, direct conversation. It ends up, though, that you start having this conversation on text. Here's my second of my points of ways that we can make this communication successful is to be focused. So as Christians, we're called to be present with each other. We're called to fully focus on other people. But we're only human, and I'm sure I am not the only person that has, I've got my phone and I'm like washing my dishes. I'm like, you're going over here, and someone's like, what's that noise? I'm like, I'm just getting something out of the fridge. Yep, Why are you doing that? Why go back over there? We've all done it. We've all done it where you're on the phone, you're having a conversation with somebody else, you're telling your cat to stop scratching the furniture, you're grabbing something off the shelf. And then, perhaps this hasn't happened to other people, it's definitely happened to me. And then someone says something and you realize, I haven't heard a word that this person has said. And then you have to go back and say, I'm really sorry. Can you say that again? Now, the difference is, with texting, the implications can be a little more embarrassing sometimes. For anyone who has ever, how many people here have ever texted someone that they did not mean to text? How many people have ever spell check has put something in your text that you did not mean to text? Okay. I think we all know where we're going with this. So, as an example of this, I was, a friend had invited me out, and it was really important to her. She's 23. She'd invited me out. It was really important to her that we went. She wanted to actually go somewhere at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. It's like, I'm in my pajamas. I've been in my pajamas since 6. Like, I am not going out. Are you kidding? So I just said to her, I'd love to, but I'm actually really, I'm not feeling that great. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for inviting me. Then I text another friend who said, oh, are you going out? And I said, no, I'm in my pajamas. I'm on my couch. I'm comfortable. I'm not going out. Hit send. Except that I sent it to the original friend. We've all, maybe just me, but I feel like all of us have done that, or there's the potential to do that. And that all comes down to focus. When we are not focused, it's very easy to make those types of mistakes, or for those inadvertent, lovely little things on your iPhone, for those things to happen, that you accidentally send an emoji that looks like someone vomiting when you really meant to send an emoji for someone smiling. I mean, those things happen. Those things happen. So some strategies, some things to think about. Think about texting and any sort of social media conversation like you would a phone call. If you need to make an important phone call for someone, if someone that you know has lost a spouse, someone that you know is going through a hard time, someone that you know just got a great promotion at work, you would not have that phone conversation in the middle of your living room with the TV on and people running around and trying to make dinner. You would take that conversation somewhere private where you could focus on that phone conversation. And so I would invite all of us to think about texting communication like that. So go somewhere where it is distraction-free, where you can take time to look at your message, to send your message, where you are mindful of what's going on around you, that you're not distracted by it, that you spell check. It sounds so, as a teacher, I feel like this should be something that I do all the time, and I don't. My mom the other day sent me a message, and she said, oh, do you want to come over tonight? I'm steaming some vegans for dinner. And then she was like, vegetables, I'm not steaming vegans. Those things just happen. So spell check what you're doing. And it's one of those situations where it's funny when it's our friends, and when it's someone that you don't know and you're still establishing that relationship, it is very easy to get in a situation where someone perceives your meaning differently than you do. Something else to keep in mind is privacy. Does anyone here have their phone, you have a password on your phone? Does anyone have a password on their phone? Okay. So I'm assuming other people do not. How many people have ever given their phone to someone, just call this number, use this, or you got a grandchild coming over, look at my phone. Our phones are not private. And when we are sending messages, it's something to be mindful of, that what we send to other people may not be read by that person. And it might be that person may be in a crowded location and they're getting that message with other people looking at it. I guarantee you if that person has children, those children have looked at that message at some point. Also, with privacy, none of our, messages can go to different media outlets. So you can send a message to someone's phone. It goes to their phone. It also goes to their computer. So if they're checking their messages at work, that message can pop up on their work computer. So it's something to just keep in mind, that what we think of as private, that we can have a private conversation in person, is not at all private the way that we think it is through text communication. So one strategy to think about is, how can I make what I'm saying as private as possible? Maybe avoid certain names, maybe avoid certain names, avoid talking about, using specifics that might potentially give someone a different idea of what's going on. Also remember, anything that you're sending on Facebook or Instagram, I'm not sure about the other ones, but Facebook or Instagram, anything you send, you can delete it, but it's never actually deleted. So those messages are there forever. And there are no read receipts on Facebook and Instagram. Once someone looks at it, they've read it. They've read it, you can't unread it. And Facebook is also one of those great examples where boundaries really come into play. It's really tempting to go and search someone up on, oh, I think I know this person. You go and you look on Facebook and you say, oh, okay, yeah, I know this person from this place, from that place, from this place. And sometimes that can be really helpful, and other times we want to think about how looking at someone in terms of their social media can place privacy concerns on the information that you might want to share with them. I actually had to go and create a Facebook page to watch the Petersons, to watch your talk last week, because I didn't have a Facebook page, so I had to go and make one to watch it, which was great. So the last piece that I want to talk about here is this is the biggie, miscommunication. So if you see that charming little comic that's down the bottom, so there's a difference between saying, let's eat grandma, and let's eat grandma. Very, very different. Very different. We're not cannibals. We are not trying to, we're not trying to kill anyone with grammar here. But the point being, it's very, very easy on social media to get the wrong idea. It is very easy to miscommunicate when you don't intend to. Show of hands, how many people have ever had an uncomfortable conversation and it was all the result of a miscommunication through some sort of social media? Okay. So something that very easily happens is things that I think we don't think about. You've got tone. How do you tell on a text if someone is mad at you? It's capitals. Yep. Or if you're my mom, you text everything in capitals all the time, which could be that she's Italian, or it could just be that it's just set on capitals. But yeah, capitals. Anyone ever, weirdly, punctuation. Punctuation is one of those things. If you are texting someone, and as a teacher, I'm one of those people that will text in full sentences with capitals and punctuation. Bugs all of my friends, but that's what I will do. If you use a period, that is considered to be making a statement that you are kind of annoyed at somebody. Really? Yes. Very odd. Which is why on texting, there's a lot of exclamation points. Everyone's really happy. Everyone's using emojis, smiley face. And part of that is so that you do not misinterpret what someone means. If you say to someone, I'll meet you later, period. I have had conversations with people where they've said, oh, I thought that said, I'll meet you later, as opposed to, meet you later, exclamation point. So things like that to just bear in mind. Bear in mind. Yeah.
Don't you think that's generational?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is absolutely generational. And I think it's one of those things that...
I use periods all the time.
So we had a great question about, is that generational? I think it's absolutely generational. And I bring it up because if we go back to that statistic that 50% of adults prefer texting, I think it's just something to keep in mind, because it is going to become The generation of people that will see that as rude, who might misinterpret that, are pretty rapidly going to become adults. And so it's something that just bears in mind. It's not a hard and fast rule. I think something to bear in mind, and if you ever find yourself on the receiving end of someone who thinks you're annoyed at them, thinks you're mad at them, it's just something to consider, to think.
In addition to it being generational, it's also gendered.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to say more?
I mean, there's plenty of emerging research on, how women try to, when they're sending messages, try to make themselves less threatening. And one of the ways they do that is by being overly positive, and exclamation points, and a man is far less likely to do that in any kind of written communication.
So just for people watching at home, I'm just going to repeat what was just said, that it's also a very gendered approach to communication. That there's emerging research that's come out that's shown that women will tend to be more positive, will show themselves to be more positive and less threatening on social media and through texting by using emojis, by using exclamation points, and men tend not to be. Something else to consider for miscommunication is technological difficulties. I live in Gloucester, I live in Lanesville, which means that there's a huge section of my house that I cannot call people from because it's a dead zone. If you ever drive through Lanesville, you'll see a lot of people talking on their phone at their mailbox. And it's because of the way the granite is in that part of town that most people just don't have signal in large parts of their house. It is very frustrating, as all of us know, to be in a conversation with someone, whether you're texting or whether you're on the phone, and the signal keeps shorting out, but the other person, they can hear you fine, you can't hear them. Or you're cutting out, and you can't tell, and they're trying to share something that's important, they're trying to share something that makes them feel vulnerable, and you're catching every other word. You might have to ask them to repeat something, and a lot of that safety that you want to promote within a conversation can feel lost. So that's something else to keep in mind, not only when you're in an environment that you're going to be able to be focused, but think about where you are going to have these conversations so that you experience the least troublesome technological difficulties. It's also very easy to inadvertently talk to the wrong person. If you are calling someone and someone else answers if it's a house phone and someone else answers the phone, one of the things that we learn in Stephen Ministry is that we don't want to give personal information. Just say, hi, I'm Caroline, I'm calling for this person. You don't need to say really any more than that, and just allow that person the time and the space to get back to you. Also, another strategy to avoid miscommunication, it really goes back to establishing boundaries that really talk about these things with someone that you are in this conversation with. Are you someone that when you get a message, you're going to take some time before you answer? Does that mean that, what does that imply? Something that I have learned over the past several years, particularly having to do a lot of emotional work with adolescents who then became young adults, is most people, we are thinking about ourselves first, and we're not thinking about another person. So if we are feeling uncomfortable, usually it's something that has to do with a way that we are perceiving something. And it might not actually be that that's what's going on. So it's always helpful to have that direct conversation with the other person. When we have this conversation, I felt this. Is this how you felt? Always checking. When you go through some of there's really fantastic research out there and some different strategies, particularly by understood.org, and they really keep coming back to checking, always checking in. How are you feeling? How did this make you feel? How does this seem to you? I hear, it seems like you sound angry. Are you? I just want to check. It seems like you're having a tough time with this. Are you? I just want to check. So really kind of going back, again, these are things that if we are face to face, we don't really check in with those things because you can see it. You can see someone, you get to know them. We are in their physical space. There is all of this nonverbal communication that goes on that you lose when you are in a digital platform. And I can say too that also having had some, our particular Stephen Ministry group meets through Zoom, and there are certainly times when it's hard to determine if someone's having issues because of technological difficulties, or if there are issues going on because someone is just considering something. So those are all those pieces that we want to keep in mind. So for boundaries, focus, privacy, and miscommunication, avoiding that miscommunication. I wanted to just open up with the last few minutes here. I just wanted to kind of open up. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to share, insights that you have, things that you want to talk about?
When, and I realize you may need to repeat this question, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. When you recognize that the relationship is important and is suffering from miscommunications due to different boundaries, and you expect that raising the question of boundaries will lead to more miscommunication and an offense, how do you overcome that that problem? How do you get people to drop their defenses and work to establish a common view of healthy boundaries?
We had a question that is, when you are in a relationship that you know is important and you're worried that a conversation about boundaries is going to perhaps create more friction and more tension within that caring relationship, how do you get to a point where you can have that person feel safe and even out some of those boundary issues?
And particularly where there are different boundary rules.
Where there are different boundary rules.
Held by each party.
Okay. I'm going to take a moment to consider before I answer. My initial, and I'm certainly not the expert on this, but my initial go-to would be being as direct, having a direct conversation in person, as direct as possible about when I say this, when I text that, when I hear this, I feel that, can go a long way to making someone understand that your perceptions and your method of communication is rooted in these these particular elements as opposed to I'm reacting to what you're saying. Does anyone else have thoughts on that or a different way that they might approach that? Yeah, Kathy.
I think it probably points to making sure that you do those communications at the beginning, if possible. Like, you don't know if it's going to turn into something important. You don't know if it's going to be something that's going to be contentious. But I think that if you say, when, like, just get the texting stuff out. If we're going to be texting back and forth, there's a couple things I want to make sure that we both understand.
Mm-hmm.
From the very beginning, and then at least you can refer back to that later.
So Kathy brings up a good point. She says if you have that conversation to establish those boundaries very clearly in the beginning, that can be something that you continually refer back to. Yeah, I think that that's the clarity, the direct clarity is very important at the outset.
It's impossible to anticipate sometimes though what is going to hurt or offend because we're not in each other's minds.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, what I do is I make it about myself, similar to what you were saying. I feel this way when, not you make me feel.
So we had a great comment about I statements that rather than, because we can't anticipate how people are going to react, using I statements. I feel that, not you make me feel this. Other questions, comments, thoughts, funny experiences?
I think as we've been talking, it's been very age-based in the direction of older individuals trying to talk to younger individuals. I think it would also be helpful for all of us who maybe are below a certain age cutoff to be thinking about our communication with older individuals and how we might be coming across and how we might need to change our method of communication based on who we are trying to communicate with that is in a different age bracket as well.
So there's a great comment about rather than, this presentation has been really focused on older individuals communicating with younger individuals, and that there needs to be a shift to think about how younger individuals are able to perhaps switch their communication to meet the needs of each individual that we're talking with.
I think there's a responsibility for both parties.
I think that's a very good point. Also, for the older generation, which I'm a part of, it used to be that the only means of communication was a phone call. You had to call someone. You had to leave a voice message on their answering machine. Nowadays, I find myself, I won't really call someone. I will text them first. I don't want to interrupt someone or call someone at an inappropriate time. So I'll text and say, I'd like to talk to you. Is this a good time to talk? If not, let me know when you're available. So I don't even put up calls anymore, which is very interesting. I hadn't even considered that, but I don't even feel, free to just call someone anymore. I want to make sure that it's appropriate and a good time for them. That's something that has changed, I think, in my life in the last 5 to 10 years.
No, there was a comment that something that has shifted in many people's lives is rather than just picking up the phone and calling someone, texting first and asking, is this a good time? And if not, when would be a good time for me to call you? That's certainly something I have noticed in the last several years. I remember when the first advertisements were on TV for texting. And I remember because it was an ad about people texting each other duck, 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 goose. And I remember thinking, that is such a frustrating means of communication. Why would anyone do that when you could just call? It was a short-sighted insight on my part.
I'm glad to hear someone in your generation felt that way. I certainly did at the time.
Carolyn, here's a four-letter word. Now, where does your mind go when I say that? But the four-letter word is with. So, in the notion of community, conversation, communication, that four-letter word is prominent. And I think we have a tendency in the technological age to abrogate with, and we put it off into the trash bin. It takes a lot to energize the word with, to walk with somebody, to have a conversation with somebody, to do something with somebody. And what you've been saying is undergirding the with. But it can become tedious.
Yes.
Because this thumb could change the world. Or the world that I live in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that incorporates what you've put here, which maybe we don't think of it that often. That with is, it's part of grammar, prepositions, commas, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking as an antiquarian now.
Thank you for this. I missed the first 10 or 15 minutes, so I apologize if you missed it at that point. This conversation is around the concept of Stephen's ministers, and so along with that can be moments of crisis or moments of like not crisis, but just whatever's going on in someone's life. And so what is the prevailing wisdom about using text or about using electronic communications when it is a crisis situation or it is a situation where, I guess, me personally, I would think it's really better to have an in-person conversation or a phone call. And I didn't know if there was any research done on situations like that where, yeah, I can see where a text would be helpful to give like short pieces of encouragement, but to really have a back and forth conversation about something like at that level are there suggestions one way or the other as to whether, hey, this is the way people communicate, you have to learn how to do this, or it's actually really better to use the text to set up an in-person conversation? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Thank you for that question. I'm just going to repeat it. So there was a question about, in the context of Stephen ministry, when you have situations of crisis, is there a recommended method of either using written communication through text or using in-person communication? Is there any research that might speak to that? And I can say first that I do not readily have any research available to give to you, but what I can say from looking at the Stephen ministry, as a Stephen minister who had an almost 2-year caring relationship with another person, and that the entirety of that was conducted digitally because of COVID, that there were a lot of challenges that needed to be worked out and addressed through this conversation of boundaries, and a lot of conversations around when, a lot of, from what we were saying here in terms of saying, I feel this. Is this how you're feeling? I'm sensing that this means that to you. Am I right on it? There was a lot of clarification. My personal preference as a Stephen minister would be, as much as you can, to move those conversations to in person, or at the minimum, at least on Zoom, or FaceTime, or something where you are able to see a person's face, to gauge their reaction, to hear the tone of their voice. Because even on the phone, when my care receiver and I would talk on the phone, sometimes, I'm a sigher. And that is not an indication that I am bored. I think it comes from the fact that I have asthma, and so sometimes I just let out a big sigh. And I did not know I did that until it was brought to my attention. And it was a question from the care receiver: are you annoyed at what I just said? And I said, no, not at all. Can you tell me why you think that? Well, you just sighed. You gave this big sigh. If that had been in person, or even face-to-face on Zoom, I think that could have been, that would not have been miscommunicated. I hope that we never end up going back to the pandemic lifestyle that we were in, but I think having those conversations at the outset about boundaries, and any time you're starting to sense that something is feeling uncomfortable, or you might be misinterpreting something, or you just feel like you might be missing something, or that the person that you're having the conversation with seems uncomfortable, bring it into the light. Bring it into the light in the spirit of empathy, in the spirit of communication. And the phrase I always like to use is, I want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. And that's what I say a lot. I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. I'm not sure I'm understanding you in this. And that's something that can really, it opens the conversation to make sure that everyone's feelings are being heard and felt. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments, concerns? We probably have time for one more. Yeah.
I don't have a question, I want to thank you, because I think it's very important to get this communication, or miscommunication. It's very, very important. I know so many people, and myself, who've been offended by emails they've received. And I use email. I love texting. I never call if I can text. But I can see, I never call. Hardly ever call. My friends. I text everybody. But I do see the importance, and I know so many people who've been offended by emails they received, and what do you do then? I mean, it's too late. It's on paper. You've got it. I mean, it's written down. It's on the computer. It's too late once you've done it. Once you've sent that email or received it, there's not much it's going to do to change somebody's attitude about it. I think you've already said the words, and I do think I appreciate what you said. To really think and face-to-face is a much better way to handle things. And it's caused a lot of upsets in many cases. So I just want to thank you for that, because I think it is important to really think about that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Kathy?
Caroline, the other thing I remember from training, which mine was a long, long time ago, email specifically, I don't even know if texting was a thing yet, but email specifically was discouraged due to the privacy issues. Because it is in writing. It is saved in some format on the cloud forever.
Yep.
And that can be a real challenge for both care receiver and
Yes.
caregiver. I think it is to be discouraged. I think if pandemic accepted, obviously, but determining when you're gonna have a phone call, or when you're gonna meet in person, or when you're gonna do FaceTime or Zoom. And that's it.
Yes.
I think email specifically is, but I guess text is the same.
I think another issue that I hadn't really considered when our primary communication as Stephen ministers is written, is through text or through email, it negates the need to meet in person. So maybe you have a meeting coming up and someone would say, we don't need to meet, we've already talked about it all. But the purpose of Stephen ministry is presence. It's to be together, to pray together, to walk together, and when that's done without being together, well, and it's, you're helping, but it's not quite the same thing.
Maybe piggybacking on what Penny's just said, I'm grateful for this, and one reason is that it's exposed the ways in which the proliferation of communications technologies, texting, emailing, FaceTime, Facebook messaging, WhatsApp, all the rest of this, in many ways, it lends a casualness to the importance of communication to start with. It dumbs down the significance of how we relate to one another and suggests that it doesn't really matter that much. And as the father of somebody who lives on the other side of the world and lives on WeChat, where everything happens through that platform, let me tell you, it has pernicious consequences.
Yes, it does.
And in that case, the government sees everything.
Well, if you disappear next week, we'll know what happens. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope that this was helpful.